Canada just announced a major shift in its immigration plans for 2025 to 2027, and here's the big news. They're planning to cut down the number of permanent and temporary residents allowed into the country. In this video, we'll look at the numbers, but more importantly, we'll break down what they really mean and dive into the ripple effects this could have on international students. Whether you're a prospective student planning to study here, a current international student already in Canada, or an international graduate working here on a post-graduation work permit. So let's get into the nitty-gritty together. Alright, last week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Immigration Minister Mark Miller shared Canada's new immigration plan for 2025 to 2027. Long story short, the plan is to cut down on the number of permanent and temporary residents coming into Canada. According to the government, the goal of these cuts is to better manage Canada's immigration system. And the reason for that is because they've cited concerns over previous immigration efforts that impact the economy, especially around housing availability and labor market balance. In their view, adjusting the intake of newcomers will help address these issues. But honestly, I think there's more going on here. It seems like politics might be playing a big role in these decisions, and I'll share some of my thoughts on that later. Anyway, naturally, my first reaction to these changes was, whoa. Because these changes could mean big changes for both current and future international students in Canada, with potential ripple effects on everything from study plans to work opportunities and even the possibility of permanently settling here. So what exactly do the numbers say? Well, let's dive into that next. Alright, so when you check out the recent immigration levels plan on the IRCC website, one thing stands out immediately. And that is, for the first time ever, the government has published targeted numbers for both temporary and permanent residents. So in the past, they would only provide projections for PRs, but now temporary residents are included as well, which is where we'll start. For context, temporary residents include international students and workers under two main programs, and they are the International Mobility Program and the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. In fact, when you look at the table, adding up these two programs gives us the total number of workers that they plan to admit. Separately, there's a category specifically for students, and they are defined as foreign nationals on a study permit for programs longer than 6 months at approved designated learning institutions. Now, if we look at the government's targeted numbers for temporary residents, we see the following. So in 2025, we're looking at around 674,000 TRs. In 2026, that's around 517,000 temporary residents. And in 2027, that's 544,000 temporary residents. From these numbers, we can see that the number of international students will remain consistent from 2025 to 2027 at nearly 306,000 each year. Similarly, the number of workers under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program will hold steady at 82,000 annually. However, there's a huge reduction in the International Mobility Program, with numbers dropping from nearly 286,000 in 2025 to almost 129,000 in 2026, which is a decrease of almost 55%. This is a drastic cut, guys, especially when we consider that the IMP also includes post-graduation work permit holders who make up a large portion of this program. Now, to achieve these reductions, we already see the government have made changes to PGWP eligibility requirements, making it harder for students to qualify. And this directly impacts international students hoping to work in Canada after graduation because of the additional hurdles put in place for those aiming to gain Canadian work experience or transition to permanent residency. Now, let's take a look at the overall targets for permanent residents. We've actually compared the 2024 to 2026 plan to the 2025 to 2027 plan, and here are the key differences. First, in 2025, the target drops from 500,000 to 395,000, which is a reduction of 21%. Meanwhile, in 2026, the target decreases further from 500,000 to 380,000, which is a reduction of 24%. Finally, in 2027, although there's nothing to compare it to, the target is set at 365,000, continuing the trend of reduced PR numbers. Alright, moving on, let's take a closer look at the breakdown of PR categories in this table. So as you can see, on the left side, we see various PR categories. But for now, let's focus on the economic class, as this is where most international students hoping to secure PR are likely to apply. So let's focus our attention on the 2025 column, and the total number of applicants targeted under the economic class is a little over 232,000, which makes up 58% of the overall PR target. Now within that, the top 3 categories under the economic class are in Canada Focus at nearly 83,000, PNP or Provincial Nominee Programs at 55,000, and Federal Economic Priorities at nearly 42,000. For many students, these categories are key pathways to PR. Now let's distinguish the 3 categories from each other, starting with In Canada Focus. So the In Canada Focus category includes candidates from programs like the Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Worker, Federal Skilled Trades, and various regional programs. Provincial nominee programs, on the other hand, allow provinces and territories to nominate individuals who meet specific local labor market needs. Finally, Federal Economic Priorities target candidates with specific skills, training, and language abilities that align with Canada's current labor market needs. Notably, IRCC has indicated that the priority categories for 2025 will include healthcare occupations, trade occupations, and candidates with French language proficiency. Alright, moving on, let's compare these subcategories within the economic class in the 2024 to 2026 plan to those in the new 2025 to 2027 plan. First, the previous plan did not include the Federal Economic Priorities category, which has now been introduced. Second, under the 2024 to 2026 plan, the targeted number for provincial nominee programs back then in 2025 was set at 120,000. But in the new plan, this target has been reduced to 55,000, marking a 55% decrease. Third, the most recent plan also includes a new category called In Canada Focus, which represents a subset of candidates who previously fell under the Federal High Skilled category. When we compare the two, there's a reduction from 118,000 in the old plan to a roughly 83,000 in the new one, which is a 29% decrease. So now that we've laid out the numbers, what are our insights and observations looking at them? Well, our general observations around the PR targets are the following. First, there's an overall drop in PR numbers, with a decrease of over 100,000 per year starting in 2025. This signals that Canada is becoming more selective about who they choose to welcome, which directly impacts the opportunities available for international students hoping to transition to PR. Second, we're also seeing shifts within the economic class, especially with the introduction of new subcategories like Federal Economic Priorities and In Canada Focus. This reflects a clearer emphasis on aligning PR pathways with Canada's labor market needs, prioritizing applicants with in-demand skills, language proficiency in English and French, and those with Canadian work experience. Third, PNP numbers are going down, with a sharp reduction from 120,000 to 55,000 for 2025. This tells us that Canada is moving toward fewer, more targeted regional nominations. With that, provinces are likely to set stricter criteria and prioritize candidates who closely align with local labor market needs, which will increase competition. Fourth, the new Federal Economic Priorities category shows Canada's focus on applicants with skills that match specific labor needs. And while it wasn't stated outright, this category seems similar to Express Entry's category-based draws designed to quickly address labor shortages in Canada. And finally, there's now an emphasis on in-Canada candidates prioritizing those already here, which is promising news for international students. Since we started seeing more CEC draws mid-year, this update signals that they may become more frequent moving forward. This means more spots are opening up, though it's still uncertain if this will directly lead to lesser competition. So now that we've discussed the numbers and what they mean, if there is anything that we can take away from this, here's what I'd say to a few key groups of students. Let's start with prospective students, aka those planning to study in Canada in the coming years. Now guys, with the overall reduction in temporary resident numbers and even tighter eligibility for study permits, competition is clearly ramping up. Think of it like this. Before, Canada's doors were wide open for international students, but now they're just slightly ajar. But if you were to ask me on a deeper level, I actually see this as an upside because while the process may be tougher at the start, there's a potential reward in the end. You see, overcoming these initial obstacles could actually lead to a more direct path to permanent residency. What I mean by that is that if you choose an in-demand program at a reputable school, that can lead to better work opportunities. And assuming those align with Canada's labor market needs, then your PR journey could be smoother compared to those without a clear plan. In short, I think this is a case of make the tough choice now for an easier life later, rather than choosing the easy route now and facing tougher challenges down the line. Next, let's talk about international students currently studying in Canada. I know that some of you might feel caught in the middle of all these changes, especially with the new policies coming into effect and needing to adapt quickly. So there's both good and bad news here. Starting with the bad news, the tightening of the rules around eligibility for the post-graduation work permit may be a concern. With major reductions under the International Mobility Program, I expect that some students will need to meet additional requirements or will even lose their eligibility for the PGWP. I mean, we're already seeing these changes, such as the new language proficiency requirements for PGWP applicants, and also the need to study in specific fields to qualify. I also see this affecting spouses on open work permits, as their eligibility is tied to the students, which could create a double setback if you don't meet the new PGWP criteria. On the bright side, these additional requirements won't really impact most students already in Canada. For example, the language requirement is generally feasible to meet, and the field of study restriction only applies to those who applied for a study permit after November 1st, 2024. So if you applied before that date, you'll only need to meet the language requirement, which is manageable. This should be reassuring for many current students who are already here and continuing their studies. Finally, let's talk about international graduates, or those already working in Canada on a post-graduation work permit. Starting with the bad news, the reduced PR targets take effect in 2025, meaning we'll likely see a cut in eligibility for PR programs as early as a few months from now. Smaller targets directly translate to fewer opportunities for selection through PR, so you might feel the pinch as competition increases. However, there is hope, and it comes with the introduction of the In Canada Focus category, which does look promising. Through it, Canada is prioritizing PR pathways for those already in the country, like many of you. And while we're still waiting on full details, we do know that a big portion of this category may be allocated to the Canadian Experience class, which many of you may qualify for if you meet the new requirements. Additionally, there's also a mention of regional pathways within the In Canada Focus category. This suggests Canada may consider applications in lower tier jobs, such as tier 4 and 5 positions. That said, much of this is still speculative, so for now, it's a bit of a wait-and-see game as more changes roll out soon. Now, remember when I mentioned that this announcement seems more about politics than immigration? Well, let me explain why I think that way. So guys, recently we've seen some notable shifts in Canadian politics led by Justin Trudeau, whose policy has traditionally been pro-immigration. The thing is, many Canadians are increasingly blaming immigration for issues like high inflation, unemployment, and the housing crisis. As a result, there's a growing anti-immigration sentiment among Canadians, which has made Trudeau and his government's policies increasingly unpopular, even to the point where members of his own party have urged him to step down before the next election. Speaking of the election, a federal election is expected on or before October 2025, and we're already seeing the current coalition of the NDP and Liberals breaking apart. So how does this connect to the recent immigration levels plan? Well, to me, this announcement feels like a last-minute attempt by Trudeau to show Canadians he's taking steps to improve the country. But quite frankly, I think it's too little too late for both Canadians and international students. Again, Canadians are frustrated with issues like inflation, unemployment, and the housing crisis, feeling like they're too far gone to reverse. Meanwhile, international students are also feeling frustrated, especially with abrupt policy changes that add uncertainty and risk to their plans. And that's totally understandable. I mean, imagine planning the next 5 years of your life only to be told in year 3 or 4 that the rules have changed. Now, I built this platform to help international students plan their future here. But I have to admit that I've also noticed some issues within the international student program that make me question the current systems in place. Do I think that some of these policies are unfair or harsh? Yes. But I also see the long-term benefit because while I am pro-international student, I mainly support those who come prepared with a clear study plan and the skills needed to thrive in Canada. Anyway, those are my thoughts, but I know that my audience, those watching right now, are also thoughtful and quick thinking. So guys, I want to turn this question over to you. What are your thoughts, comments, or frustrations about these changes? Let's have a healthy conversation in the comments without directing blame. Anyway, I hope this video helped you understand the meaning behind the numbers and gave you some ideas on how to strategize for your future in Canada. If you found this video helpful, you know the drill. Hit the like button and also hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. Once again, thanks for watching. Stay safe and be kind. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.